Disneyland is one of the most visited and iconic theme parks in the entire world, called the happiest place on Earth. And for my money, there are very few parks that match Disneyland's overall quality. While it doesn't have the biggest thrilling roller coasters or most extreme attractions, Disneyland is a park anyone can enjoy. For that reason, among many others, I think it lives up to the name as happiest place on Earth and is one of the world's greatest theme parks. In this review, I intend to give you all the information you need to know before visiting. I mentioned quality a moment ago, and that really is a good word to sum up Disneyland. Every single area in this park is well themed, and just about every single attraction has some sort of story. Everything that has been placed in Disneyland was done so very intentionally, and there are a lot of hidden details that you're gonna miss on your first, second, or even third visits. This is one of the reasons why you can still really enjoy visiting this park again, because you're always going to notice new things. Now, Disneyland is far from perfect, so don't hear me say that it is, and we'll get into some of those issues later in this review. But Disneyland is a park that has been wildly influential not only on the Disney company and their parks around the world, but also the entire theme park industry. There have been many things throughout the years that were done for the first time here at Disneyland. This park was originally constructed on the site of a former orange and walnut grove. Construction began in 1954, with the park opening on July 17, 1955. When you look back, it's almost impressive this park got off the ground. Their opening day was an absolute disaster. Between 101-degree weather, guests jumping fences, women's heels sinking into the concrete because it was newly poured, and no operating drinking fountains, as they had to choose between that and the toilets operating due to a plumber strike, Disneyland's opening day was kind of a nightmare. But a lot of people showed up, and a lot of people showed up quickly. 1 million guests visited Disneyland in the first 7 weeks alone, which was, I guess, a good indicator, and Disneyland has been busy ever since. This is the park that kicked off the Walt Disney Company's interest in building theme parks. It led to a second gate in California in 2001, when Disney California Adventure opened to the public. In addition to DCA, this maybe more notably paved the way for Disney World. Disney's Magic Kingdom opened in 1971, followed by Epcot in 1982, Disney's Hollywood Studios in 1989, and Disney's Animal Kingdom in 1998. Not only that, but the first park of the Tokyo Disney Resort, Tokyo Disneyland, opened in 1983, and its sister park, Tokyo Disney Sea, one of my top bucket list parks, opened in 2001. Paris saw its first Disney Park edition in 1992 with Disneyland Paris, and then 10 years later, in 2002, Walt Disney Studios opened to the public. Lastly, a couple of parks have opened in China as well. Hong Kong Disneyland opened in 2005, and Shanghai Disneyland is the most recent of the bunch, opening in 2016. All of these parks in some way were modeled after Disneyland, but in particular the other castle parks. Those no doubt take a lot of inspiration from Disneyland's ride lineup and layout. This park has also definitely impacted the theme park industry as a whole, both in terms of ride technology, ride systems, and general innovations like audio animatronics. Theme parks would look a lot different without Disneyland. So, okay, we've established that it's been important for the theme park industry, but what does it look like to visit this park in 2025 or beyond? Well, there's actually quite a lot that goes into it. I'm going to state this once now as a preface so I don't have to bring it up later in this video, but all of this information is as of March 2025. It's important to note that connecting both Disney California Adventure and Disneyland is the downtown Disney shopping district. There are a ton of shops and eateries through here, and some pretty cool spots. If you enjoy shopping more than rides, I'm not totally sure why you're here, but if you do, this might be the perfect spot for you. It'll likely be busier than your average mall, especially at nighttime when people leave the parks early to go shopping. But there's some good places to eat, and you don't need to buy an admission ticket. All you need to do is go through security. One of my favorite spots to eat here and at the resort is found at the Disneyland Hotel, so at the far opposite end if you're at the front gates. Trader Sam's is the one I'm thinking of here. There's some good food, and maybe, depending on the night, even some live entertainment. Speaking of hotels, a big decision you're going to have to make if you're coming from out of town is where you're going to stay. There are a couple options. Number 1, you can stay at a hotel that isn't within walking distance. Number 2, you can stay at a hotel within walking distance. And number 3, you can stay at a resort hotel. There are many hotels located on South Harbor Boulevard, which is just across the street from the Disneyland Esplanade. A few of these hotels are a 5-minute walk or less from the front entrance, which is incredibly convenient. Depending on the season and room size, rates will typically run from about $150 to upwards of $300 per night. This stretch of hotels, I think, strikes the best quality between convenience and budget. And in a lot of cases, you are closer to the front entrance from these hotels than you are from the resort hotels. If you want to stay completely on Disney property, this is a good way to do that. Depending on the season, rates range from about $400 to upwards of $700. One hotel though that is incredibly convenient is the Grand Californian. It does have its own custom entrance into California Adventure, but it's also very close to the Esplanade, making it convenient for Disneyland as well. If you can afford it, this place is definitely worth staying at. It's incredible. Now, let's address the biggest pro with staying on site at a resort hotel: early entry. This is super cool. You get in a half hour before everybody else does, and a half hour before official park opening time. Now, the park that this is offered at does jump back and forth via the day. If Disneyland has early entry running for a certain day, California Adventure will not have early entry on that same day, and vice versa. Early entry can be very helpful with tackling the first couple of hours of your day. For Disneyland specifically, as of now, you get some access to Fantasyland and Tomorrowland, though definitely check the website before your visit to see what's available. So by the reverse token, if you're not staying at a resort hotel, try to avoid rope dropping the park that's using early entry on that day. So if California Adventure has early entry, rope drop Disneyland instead. Alright, so you've got a place to stay, now let's book a reservation. First off, as of March 2025, you must have a reservation to get into the park. So always check for sales and reduced rates online, because as you might imagine, Disneyland is pretty expensive. Depending on the day and season, a ticket for just Disneyland costs $103 to $206. Granted, the more days you go, the cheaper per day it becomes. If you're a Southern California resident, your rate starts at just $67, so that's a nice little discount. Now, if you want to get a park hopper, that's going to add an extra $65 to $75 per ticket per day. Now, a quick note on park hopping. If you want to park hop, that's great, and I totally recommend doing that. But not only will this be a little extra expensive, but you can't park hop until after 11 a.m., so factor that into your plan for the day. Another expense, but a well worth it one, is the Lightning Lane FastPass system. This costs a little upwards of $35 per person per day. Hey, remember when FastPass systems were free at Disneyland? It really wasn't that long ago. Just saying. Despite its cost, Lightning Lane is absolutely worth purchasing. You'll be able to do a lot more attractions and have, well, for Disney standards, a less stressful day. Here's how the system works. Using the park app, you can reserve one specific attraction once per day, i.e. you can't skip the line of one ride twice in one given day. At a lot of parks, the FastPass system basically takes you right to the station and you board pretty much immediately. That's not always the case with Disneyland though. A lot of the times, you want to see the pre-show, and so because of that, you'll still be waiting 20 to 25 minutes. Sometimes, depending on how many Lightning Lane users there are for a specific attraction, you could get even more. Now, you will get an hour return window for each ride that you book. From there, you are eligible to either A, select the next one when you scan into your current Lightning Lane, or B, get another one if 2 hours goes by, whichever comes first. Return windows though can be hours ahead of the current time of day, sometimes even 7, 8, 9 hours ahead of what time it currently is. Indiana Jones, Space Mountain, and Tiana's Bayou Adventure typically get pushed back the most. Definitely keep an eye on this because you want to ride these attractions and the other attractions included on the Lightning Lane system. Just about every major ride is included. The exception is Rise of the Resistance. Now, technically you can skip this line, but with a $20 plus fee, which I don't think is very wise at all. I can see scenarios where you might want to pay to skip the line, but this line doesn't usually get nearly as long as it did a few years ago, and so I think typically you can wait for it, especially in the evening, which I'll touch more on a bit later. On the note of Lightning Lane, let's talk about mobile order real quick. This is an absolute must in my opinion, and it will save you a ton of time for waiting in long food lines. Not all restaurants offer this, but it's pretty simple to the Lightning Lane system. You book a return window for the restaurant of your choice. The return window is 15 minutes, and when you tell them that you're at the location, they will start to prepare your food, and the app will update when it's ready, telling you the information where to pick up your food. It's a relatively straightforward process that works extremely well, and there are a lot of people that still don't use it, so there are still some very long food lines at Disneyland that at all costs you definitely want to avoid. Mobile order is honestly one of the biggest recommendations I can give because, as you probably noticed by this point in the review, Disneyland will be busy. You will experience crowds here, and I really don't think that there are quiet days so much as there is less busy days. Even on quote quieter days, the lines for the most popular attractions will still exceed the 30 to 60 minute mark. And that is one of the reasons why you need a solid touring plan when going to Disneyland to tackle the crowds. Disneyland opens 8 a.m. daily, and so if you want to be one of the first ones in the park, you're going to have to get to the gate a lot earlier than that. The outdoor gate that lets you onto the Esplanade opens at 6:30. Security opens 30 minutes later at 7 o'clock. The turnstiles open at about 7:15, and early entry gets access starting at 7:30. Then rope drop for everybody is at 8. If you don't have early entry and want to be one of the first ones riding your favorite ride, then you're going to need to take advantage of these openings before the park. Arriving at park opening or even 30 minutes before park opening isn't going to be good enough just because of the demand that this park has. The best times to be in Disneyland are the first 3 hours and the last 3 hours. The first 3, namely because you can typically ride more attractions if you go in a proper order. Half of visiting Disney is just handling the crowds, because there are always quite a lot of them. So, how should you tour this park? Well, let's start with the Fantasyland touring plan. You're going to start with Peter Pan's Flight, then Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, then Snow White's Enchanted Wish. At this time, I would start looking for lightning lanes. Then you can head over to Alice in Wonderland. We're skipping Pinocchio because you can ride that later because it usually has a short wait. Now, if you notice Peter Pan's Flight already has a long wait even at 8 a.m., I would recommend skipping this ride and coming back to it at the end of the night. If it's a day where Disneyland has early entry, this ride could have a 30 to 45 minute wait before official park opening time, which is pretty nuts. It's important that you hit these Fantasyland dark rides early in the day because they do not offer a lightning lane, and so when the park gets really busy, you won't be able to skip their lines later in the day. Also, these queues are very, very tight, and I'll get more into that in a little bit when we talk about Fantasyland. You don't really want to be in these queues in the hot parts of the day. From here, let's go back to Toontown and get a ride on Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, and if the line isn't too long, Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin. Now, you might be tempted to use your lightning lanes on these rides, but if you can avoid it, I would. Let's remember how the lightning lane system works for a minute. You can only skip one specific attraction once per day. So if you skip Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway at 9 in the morning, you're not going to be able to skip it later in the day. Typically, Mickey and Minnie's does not have a super long wait for the first hour or two of operation, so if you're able to get back there in that amount of time, you should be able to stand by it no problem. Plus, this allows you to have another lightning lane booked for a ride that typically gets farther booked in advance, for example, Space Mountain or Indiana Jones, depending on where you want to go. On your way back out to your first lightning lane though, let's do one single rider ride on the Matterhorn bobsleds. The length on this does vary a little bit. Sometimes you can ride it in under 5 minutes and sometimes it's closer to 20, but typically it's much shorter than the standby. This ride has inline seating as well, so you won't be sitting next to a stranger. If you want to keep your family more together, I completely understand, and that's totally cool. But this is a good time to hit this ride in general. So now you're off to your first lightning lane and having a great time. This is the touring plan that I recommend more so than the second one, even though the second one here still works very well. This plan revolves around Frontierland and Adventureland. We're going to start with Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. You can even probably get 2 rides if you want. Then we'll go over to Indiana Jones to wait this in the standby line. From here, we'll go next door to ride Jungle Cruise. Around this time, or maybe even a little bit before, you should start looking and booking lightning lanes. Lightning lane allowing, you can get a ride on Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion before those queues build up, and then you're off to your lightning lane. This plan typically works pretty well as well from our experience, but one of the problems with it is that all 5 of these rides have lightning lane as of 2025, whereas basically none of the Fantasyland rides do. So as I already mentioned, you won't be able to skip those later in the day. Alright, let's talk about probably the one that gets rope dropped the most that shouldn't be, Rise of the Resistance. Don't get me wrong, this is an incredible attraction. I think it's Disneyland's best ride, and I think it has an argument as objectively the best ride ever built. Since we're quite a few years removed from this ride's opening day now, it's not nearly as stressful riding Rise of the Resistance in 2025 as it was in, say, 2019. First problem with going to this ride first. It doesn't always open on time, whereas most of the other rides in the park do every single day. Second problem with going here first. Even if it does open on time, this is a time commitment. Because of all the pre-shows and things going on, it probably is going to take you about half an hour to get out of there, even if there's no wait. Third problem with going here first. Typically, the longest wait for Rise to Resistance is in the morning. If you ride it in the late afternoon or evening, Rise will have a shorter wait. Now, one thing to be very aware of is that Rise typically closes early, so check the park hours on the app or website to be aware of this. Ride it in the evening? Yes, absolutely. Ride it right before park close? Probably not going to be possible, so be aware of that. Otherwise though, Disneyland keeps their queues open until park close, which is really helpful. This park closes 9 to 12 p.m. depending on the day and season. There's always great hours here. Even when you do inevitably find yourself in a longer queue, Disneyland helps you out by moving the line at a quick rate because of fast dispatches. These are some of the best operations in the world. There are as many trains on the track, as many vehicles on the course as possible, and so that really helps the line move at a decent clip in most cases. Some lines are naturally slower than others though. 99% of the time, the employees are also great, whether they're being helpful or efficient or both. This park has some great customer service and it helps with those dispatches as well. Okay, so we've gone about 15 minutes, and I think it's time that we actually dive in depth into the attraction lineup of Disneyland. Typically, I walk through attractions at parks based on category, i.e. roller coasters, dark rides, flat rides, etc. But for Disneyland, that doesn't make a ton of sense. For this video, we are going to go through land by land. Going land by land, we'll go through everything major that you need to know about that area. Let's go back to the front of the park and start with Main Street, USA. Main Street, USA was based on Walt Disney's hometown in Missouri. After going through the gates, you're first greeted by the train station, which houses the Disneyland Railroad. From here, you go to the right or the left underneath the train tracks before coming back together onto more proper Main Street, USA. Classic music plays as shops line you to the left and to the right. Of course, your eyes are drawn to the Sleeping Beauty Castle, and while this one is smaller in comparison to some of the other castles, it's still an absolute icon. While not very many, there are a couple of attractions in this area as well. I already alluded to the Disneyland Railroad. This is one of the 4 stations you can find for the railroad, the others being Tomorrowland, Mickey's Toontown, and New Orleans Square. The railroad has a classic feel and can serve as a nice transportation attraction when going from one area to another while getting away from the hustle and bustle of the main midways. Plus, there are a couple vantage points and scenes that you can only see on the Disneyland Railroad, so it's a bit more than your average train ride. In addition to the railroad, you can also find the Main Street vehicles. These go up and down the length of Main Street. And while they aren't nearly as effective for transportation as the railroad is, it's still a nice change of pace. You also can't forget about Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. This one is changing a bit to include Walt Disney, but still worth hitting up. A staple of Main Street USA though is the live entertainment, most notably the Dapper Dance. In addition to that, you will find nighttime spectaculars and parades done here. Definitely check the website and the calendar to see what nighttime spectaculars are taking place on the days of your visit because they do change a little bit. So the main thing to keep in mind with these is the impact it has on crowds. For about an hour leading up to the show, and then the show itself, Main Street USA is going to be packed. Navigating this area of the park when the show is going is near impossible. People are packed shoulder to shoulder, side to side throughout the whole street. If you're not actually seeing the show, then I would recommend staying away from the Main Street hub when these shows are going on because it's very difficult to navigate. Last thing for this area, the Jolly Holiday Cafe has some good food and treat options, so look into that. It's going to mess up our loop a little bit, but I wanted to start with Fantasyland. After walking through the castle or around to either side, you can find your way into Fantasyland. There's a lot of attractions packed into this very tight spot. Peter Pan's Flight is arguably the best of the bunch. This classic dark ride takes riders above the scenes instead of through them like a traditional dark ride. The ride system is used very effectively, and you can see why this is the most popular Fantasyland dark ride. Peter Pan has got some cool scenes and music, but unfortunately, this, along with most of the other Fantasyland dark rides, fall a little bit on the short side. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is located right next door. This one goes at a faster clip than the other dark rides. The ride doesn't really have any animatronics as it mostly uses 2D cutouts, but it's consistent so it works well. I do enjoy this ride, but the ending is a little bit confusing, as you, being Mr. Toad, are sentenced, die in a car crash, and then go to hell. Happiest place on earth, eh? Snow White's Enchanted Wish is one that has actually gotten less scary over the years. It originally opened as Snow White's Scary Adventures, but a few years ago, it was modified into Enchanted Wish, receiving some modern effects, and it works really well. They maintain the classic feel while also adding some more updated figures, and at points even projection mapping. Because of these new effects, Snow White's Enchanted Wish definitely has an argument as the best Fantasyland dark ride. Located next door to this ride is Pinocchio's Daring Journey. Unlike the former, Pinocchio is one that has not seen a ton of updates over the years, and so of all of these Fantasyland dark rides, I would say it feels the oldest. Pinocchio is not terribly impressive in 2025, but one of the nice things about it is that it almost always has a pretty short wait. This ride gives you, while not a perfect, a better idea of what some of these rides were like on opening day. There are also a couple of kids spinning rides here, those being Dumbo the Flying Elephant and King Arthur's Carousel. Both of these are solid attractions for the little ones. Casey Jr. Circus Train is the smaller train ride you can find at Disneyland. This one does not offer a transportation experience, rather it's just for the views, mostly of the Storybook Land canal boats. The latter is a slow-moving boat ride, taking riders past little vignettes of different fairy tales. Going around the corner a bit farther, we have Alice in Wonderland. This is my personal favorite Fantasyland dark ride, partly because it's the longest. There's a pretty good mix of slightly newer effects along with some of the older stuff that's been there for a long time. This ride should not be missed, and located across the midway from it is the Mad Tea Party teacup ride. These are super cute off-ride, and on-ride they're pretty fun, but definitely take a spin on it at night in comparison to day. The lighting over there is really cool. One thing I will say though is that I actually found these pretty difficult to spin. That's probably intentional, but I guess it's worth noting. That's Fantasyland proper for you, and it's actually pretty impressive how many rides they fit into this small space. Sometimes they're literally on top of each other. The music in this area is great as well. One of the problems with Fantasyland though is that the pathways and queues are pretty tight. This is why earlier in this review I recommend going away from Fantasyland if you can help it past the morning, because midday and on it can be pretty difficult to navigate in here, and most of these queues are pretty cramped and hot in the warmest parts of the day. The last thing to note is that I've heard pretty good things about Red Rose Tavern. You might want to give that eatery a go while you're at the park. As we head back towards Mickey's Toontown, we'll run across It's a Small World. Now, It's a Small World is definitely one of those rides that's more of a love it or hate it. Most of that has to do with its, let's say, catchy soundtrack. While I do wish there was a bit more variation in the tune, I can still appreciate what this ride does well. There are a lot of doll animatronics to look at, and all the scenes are very colorful. So if you can stomach the repetition of the theme song, it is definitely worth a ride. Alright, let's go back to Toontown. This area was refurbished a couple years ago, and I think they did a really nice job with the area. They opened it up a bit, and there are a lot of interactive attractions for kids, plus meet and greets in the character houses. There's a lot of things to discover in this area, especially for the little ones, and that includes 3 attractions. Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway is no doubt the star of these rides. This ride features one of the most extensive and detailed queues in the entire park, and it also has a great pre-show. This consists of a cartoon starring Mickey, Minnie, Pluto, and Goofy, and it has a fun effect at the end. That sets the stage for what is one of the better dark rides in the entire park, and it totally captures the cartoonish vibe of Mickey Mouse. This ride uses screens and physical sets very well and very seamlessly. These factors, combined with the fact that this ride has a trackless ride system so you never really know where you're going to be going next, makes this a really fun attraction. Definitely give it a whirl while you're at the park. Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin is located next door. This is a ride that I actually think gets longer waits than it probably deserves. Don't get me wrong, it is good, but often this has a longer wait than Mickey and Minnie. It almost feels like an upscale version of some of the Fantasyland dark rides we talked about earlier, and the unique thing about Roger Rabbit is that riders have the ability to spin their vehicles. If you do use the spinning feature, this basically allows you to get a 360-degree view of every scene, which is pretty cool. The other mechanical ride in this section is Chippendale's Gadget Coaster. This is a Vekoma Jr. coaster, and in terms of kids coasters, is among the better ones you'll find. It's not going to be too extreme for most really little kids, and for a lot of kids, this is probably their first roller coaster. But it's also not too boring for some older kids. It has just a little bit more bite than your average kids coaster. Toontown is honestly one of my favorite areas in the whole park. The renovation really made this area exceptional. As we head back towards Tomorrowland, let's talk about the Matterhorn bobsleds. I was a little bit unsure as to when to talk about this ride because it's located really in between Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. This was a piece of history. It opened in 1959 and it was built by Aerodynamics as the world's first tubular steel roller coaster. Remember when we were talking about the innovations that Disney has contributed to earlier? I think you can still get a lot of enjoyment out of Matterhorn, I certainly do, but at the same time, it is showing its age a little bit. Matterhorn features 2 tracks. These interact with one another, but are very different from one another. The Fantasyland side is the tamer one. Because of the fact that it has less steep drops and less sharp turns, it is also a bit more comfortable. The Tomorrowland side is a bit wilder. It's still not super crazy or anything like that, but there's definitely more drops on the Tomorrowland side, and you definitely finish the ride quicker. It is a bit on the jerkier side though, so it ultimately just depends what you prefer, a wilder experience or a more comfortable experience. Alright, let's officially step foot into Tomorrowland, and of all the areas at Disneyland, I think Tomorrowland is the one that needs the most help. There are some good parts to it, but it's caught in this weird spot where in some way it feels outdated, which seems ironic. The problem with an area themed to the future is that what's futuristic in say 1955 is not going to be futuristic 70 years later. In my opinion, just about every ride in this area has some sort of issue fitting into the Tomorrowland theme. One ride that fits right in though is Space Mountain. This classic family coaster is a really fun ride. If you were to look at it on the stat sheet or see a lights on POV, you wouldn't be terribly impressed. 3,400 feet of track and a top speed of just 32 miles an hour. Outdoors it wouldn't be anything much, but when you place it indoors and give it an awesome soundtrack, you really elevate the ride experience. These are the main reasons why Space Mountain is awesome, and don't get me wrong, when you're actually riding it, it feels a lot faster than 32 miles an hour. The sense of speed is actually pretty good. Another note with Space Mountain is that they do some different overlays, including Hyperspace Mountain and then an overlay at Halloween. So depending on when you visit, you might get a slightly different version. Not too far away is the Autopia. This track-guided car ride isn't exactly an e-ticket attraction, but it's the first time a lot of kids have the opportunity to get behind the wheel. Give this ride some credit though, it does have a pretty cool, secluded setting and even a little off-roading bit. While Star Tours has been outclassed by another Star Wars simulator on the other side of the park, this is still a classic ride. Candidly, I appreciate how this still features some of the original Star Wars characters, most notably C-3PO, who acts as your guide during the experience. I understand this ride was pretty revolutionary. No one had really ever come up with this type of ride concept before, and the type of motion that they were going to try to do on it. And I still enjoy it, but I can't help but compare it to the other simulator in Galaxy's Edge. One of the cool things though about Star Tours is that there are a lot of different stories, so you never really know which one you're going to get, giving it a lot of re-rideability. Finding Nemo is probably the most confusing ride in Tomorrowland, and that says something, to be frank. I really don't know why this ride is in this area. Nothing screams futuristic like Nemo, huh? Look, I'm not trying to hate on it, I'm just saying it doesn't make a ton of sense for this area. Now, I actually haven't had the opportunity to experience Nemo, as every time we've tried to do it, the line has been a little bit too long. But that'll definitely be something I look forward to going on next time. Probably a good ride for kids though. One thing I will say is that I think the lagoon that this ride sits in looks really nice. Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters is another one that just fits the Tomorrowland theme, ever so slightly. Now there is a cool animatronic of Buzz in the queue, and I do appreciate that. As for the ride itself, it's a physical sets-based, Omnimover interactive shooting dark ride. The interactive shooting dark ride genre in general I think has become a little too popular, and most of the time these are screen-based, so it's refreshing to see one rely on physical props and targets. And don't you worry, there are tons of targets to take aim at. The nice thing about this one though, in comparison to the one in Disney World especially, is that the guns have a bit more movement as they're attached to a cable. At the very front of the area, you can find the Astro Orbiter. This is pretty much just a spinning ride similar to Dumbo. Safe to say that it can't quite match the views of the one at Magic Kingdom either, which is placed on top of a building. The last ride in this area is the Disneyland Monorail. This will take you outside the park to downtown Disney. Or you can go the other way, from downtown Disney into the park. It also provides some cool vantage points along the way. In terms of food in Tomorrowland, there are a couple of food stands, but Alien Pizza Planet is the most notable of them. This isn't the best food option in the park though, so I would personally recommend looking elsewhere, but if you need to get that pizza fix, you can do it here. Alright, let's go across the hub now into Frontierland. Turns out there are Western themed areas outside of Europe. Who would have thought? In fact, this is probably the most famous of them all. The area feels very old-timey between the music and buildings. The star attraction here is Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. This is one of the world's best mine train roller coasters. Disneyland in particular has done a really good job upkeeping their coaster. They replaced all the track not too long ago, and so the ride is running very, very smooth. And despite how it looks, there are actually some forces. There's definitely some laterals on some of the turns, and even a few small pops of airtime. Plus, like Matterhorn, this coaster has some really impressive rock work. Unlike Matterhorn though, this coaster is very comfortable for the entire family. You can find Rancho del Zocalo in here, which is a pretty solid Mexican restaurant. The shot you're seeing right now was taken from Rancho del Zocalo. You can get a nice view of Thunder Mountain. Right around and by Frontierland is the Rivers of America. While this isn't technically classified as a land, it kind of is. There are a few notable attractions using this water. Most notably probably is the Sailing Ship Columbia / Mark Twain Riverboat. These both give a nice break from the hustle and bustle of the normal midways and allow you an opportunity to get some views of the park that you don't normally get. They can also use the Mark Twain Riverboat as a part of some of their nighttime spectaculars. Another attraction that uses these waters, but one that flies much more under the radar, is the Davy Crocker Explorer Canoes. This has a somewhat similar function as you make a loop around Tom Sawyer's Island, except this time it's fully man-powered. So you may or may not get a little bit of a workout in. Now, Tom Sawyer's Island is accessed via a raft that you take across. Like the previous attractions, you're able to get a little bit away from the hustle and bustle of the main park. You can definitely do a lot of exploring on the Pirates layer of Tom Sawyer's Island though. There's a lot of little pathways and tunnels to discover. So if you want a break in the mid-afternoon, maybe the Rivers of America are for you. Alright, let's go to Adventureland. This is another opening day area, and like Fantasyland, it can struggle at times with crowd control. Some of the pathways are a little bit on the tighter side. This area has some cool architecture and lush landscaping. It's also plussed by one of the park's best rides, Indiana Jones. This is an excellent dark ride. Before you board though, you go through one of the longest queues at Disneyland. Not long necessarily in wait time, just in length of queue. The queue goes on forever. The ride itself is one of the most epic attractions in the whole world, and it still is pretty amazing that they built this 30 years ago. The soundtrack is also one of my favorites. It keeps you completely engaged the whole time. And because of the ride vehicles and how the ride works, there's a bit more thrills on this than your traditional dark ride. The sheer scale of it makes up for the fact that it is on the shorter side. There aren't any dead spots here. Indy is fantastic, don't miss it. Located right next door, we have the Jungle Cruise, a very different type of ride. Jungle Cruise is all about the skippers and their comedy. I feel like most of the jokes that you hear on Jungle Cruise are so bad that they're good, but this ride does have really nice landscaping and a few cool animatronics or statues. Again though, it's really all about the cast members working this ride. Each of them has their own style and their own unique jokes. Jungle Cruise is definitely a good one if you want to laugh. There's also a couple non-ride attractions. This includes the Swiss Family Treehouse, which was recently refurbished. There are some little vignettes and little scenes put in here, but probably the best thing about this treehouse is the views that it provides of the rest of the park. It's a pretty decent vantage point up there for sure. Now, we also can't forget about the Enchanted Tiki Room. When this opened, this was the first attraction to use audio animatronics, so for the history alone, it's worth a go. And like many other places at Disneyland, the soundtrack will probably get stuck in your head. Next door is one of the best spots for Dole Whip in the whole park, Tropical Hideaway. If you're not into sweets, then Bengal Barbecue is one of my favorite places to eat. The serving sizes are a little bit small. I think they're more intended to be snack size, but if you get a few of them, you can get a meal out of it. The meat skewers, especially the beef ones, are pretty dang good. At times, it's difficult to tell where Adventureland ends and New Orleans Square begins. This area isn't super big, but is home to a couple very notable attractions, the first of which is Pirates of the Caribbean. This is one of the world's best boat rides, and it's the best Pirates of the Caribbean here in the United States, as it's longer than the one at Disney's Magic Kingdom. Like Indiana Jones that we just mentioned a moment ago, this ride has some impressive scenes with a ton of audio animatronics. This line also moves very fast, so even if it looks extremely long, it's probably no more than 35 or 40 minutes at its longest. Pirates is slower paced than some of the other rides in the park, but for what it's trying to do, the pacing is perfect, and it has a little bit of thrills with 2 drops at the beginning. This area is also home to the Haunted Mansion. For opening so long ago, this ride has some effects that truly are very impressive. And it starts right in the pre-show. The Stretching Room is one of the best pre-shows not only in Disneyland, but I think one of the best pre-shows out there. Then the ride itself has a very fine line between being creepy and happy at the same time. The first half is a bit more ominous, but the second half features the ghosts having a ball. Overall, Haunted Mansion is definitely worth a ride, and even though I know how some of these effects work, they're still very impressive. Of course, when we talk about New Orleans Square, we have to talk about Blue Bayou, one of the biggest luxury restaurants in the entire park. It is expensive, no doubt, and it'd be wise to book a reservation in advance. But this restaurant has the best atmosphere of any restaurant in the park, at least in my opinion. And for what it's worth, the food is very good too. From New Orleans Square, let's go to Bayou Country, what was formerly known as Critter Country. Now this area is a bit odd because it feels like a continuation of New Orleans Square in some ways with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and then Winnie the Pooh is kind of just slapped on next to it. Every time I'm walking through here, I think to myself, wait, what land are we in again? It's not super cohesive through this area, but at least the 2 rides are pretty well themed. Tiana's Bayou Adventure is a very solid log flume. Now, I do have a lot of criticisms with it, especially because of the fact that it replaced one of my favorite rides in Splash Mountain, but putting that aside, Tiana's does have some really nice animatronics. And of course, that final drop is still very good, and you will definitely feel the sense of speed while also getting a stomach dropping sensation. I'll also give them some credit on the finale, there's a good deal going on here. That said, I still wish this ride had a little bit better of a story. There's really not much of a story going on, whereas there was a pretty detailed story in Splash Mountain. I think Tiana's is good, it just doesn't quite match the original. Across the way is The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This is a storybook-style dark ride similar to the dark rides in Fantasyland. And while it really isn't super impressive, it always puts a smile on my face. It's colorful, it's cute, they should keep it around. Also quasi in this area is the Hungry Bear restaurant. This isn't my personal favorite, but if you want a burger, this is probably your best option. Lastly, let's go to the back of the park for Galaxy's Edge. Galaxy's Edge, or commonly known as Star Wars Land, is one of the most impressive theme park lands ever built. I mean, heck, there's like a full model of the Millennium Falcon. How cool is that? This area is expansive, featuring a lot of shops and places to discover. In general, there's a lot you can do here. Let's start with the park's best ride, Rise of the Resistance. After going through the best sequence of pre-shows of any ride in the world, you board your trackless dark ride and try to escape the First Order. I don't know if there's any ride that blends screens and physical sets together so well. There's always something to keep you engaged, and because of the trackless ride system, you don't really know where you're going to be going next. Then, to cap off the entire experience, there's a small drop and simulator bit at the end. This caps off what is truly a world-class dark ride. Also in this area is Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. In this ride, you get to pilot the Millennium Falcon. Well, technically there's 6 seats, 2 of them being pilot, 2 of them being gunner, and 2 of them being engineer. My personal preference is still a ride that's more physical sets based, but flight simulators wise, this is one of the best ones out there. Beyond the 2 mechanical rides, there's also a couple of things that you can build. These include lightsabers and droids. The lightsabers will cost you about $200 and the droids will cost you about $100. In addition to that, there's a lot of good food offerings here. Docking Bay 7 is one of the better quick service restaurants in the whole park. Ronto Roasters is probably more of a snack than a full meal, but that's pretty solid too. Oga's Cantina has a very cool indoor environment. This is mostly for drinks. And while it is definitely still stimulating, this can be a nice little break to sit down and have a drink. Finally, you can also get blue milk in Galaxy's Edge, which I have not personally done, but it seems interesting. And so, on that note, we have completed our loop of Disneyland. If you couldn't tell, there are a lot of attractions to take up your time when you're at Disneyland. I think Disneyland has more rides to do than any other Disney park. Around every corner is something to ride, something to walk through, something to watch, or even just something to look at. The level of detail is pretty astounding, and it's put in every corner of the park. Heck, even some of the bathrooms are themed. Even for those that say Disneyland isn't their forte, I think even they can acknowledge the fact that this place is quality, and ultimately, you are paying for quality. Now, it's not to say that the prices are favorable or anything like that, but this is a high quality experience. The biggest con about Disneyland, honestly, is the visitors it receives. As I said, I don't think there's really quiet days so much anymore as there are less busy days. You're gonna encounter lines, you're going to encounter cramped pathways. But if you go in with the right expectations and have a proper plan, you can still do a lot of attractions. You can also help yourself by the time of year you go. Avoiding school vacation weeks, Christmas, or really the summer in general will help you have lower crowds. So at the end of the day, if it wasn't clear enough, I do recommend that you take a visit to Disneyland if you haven't already. Is it the happiest place on earth? I don't know, that's up for debate. But one thing I'll tell you is that every time I'm there, I'm pretty happy. So that's all my thoughts on Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Let me know if you've been here down in the comment section below and what you think of it. Are the crowds too much for you? And if you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around. I really appreciate your time. If you consider subscribing, that would be wonderful. I think it's about time I let you all go. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.